Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Hillbilly Elegy. Let's talk about it. So Hillbilly Elegy is a Netflix film that was directed by Ron Howard. Now Netflix was apparently hoping to present this film as an awards contender, as a film that would actually be considered for major awards, including perhaps Best Supporting Actress, which would have likely gone to Amy Adams for her performance here. And many of us know that Amy Adams has been vying for an Oscar. There are so many performances that she has brought to us on the screen that are more than deserving of an Oscar, but time and time again it's just evaded her. Like, she just can't seem to catch a break from the Academy. Like, it seems as though every single year, just when she's so close, she seems to be beaten out by someone else. So this was supposed to be the vehicle that would drive her towards Oscar success, but unfortunately, from what I have just seen and from the buzz that I've heard on the internet, there is no way, there is literally no way in hell that she is getting that Oscar, because this film is just a mess. This film is so bad. Now, I heard so much talk from people online saying that this was the worst film of the year. I don't know about that. We'll go through my thoughts on this film, but I'm not sure about the claim that it's the worst film of the year. It's 2020. 2020 can always do worse. So I'm not sure about that claim, but I will say that there are definitely issues which we will definitely go through. But before we get into my thoughts on this film, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Also, be warned that this is a somewhat spoiler review. Like, we're not going to be going into much detail, but there are some issues here that I do want to explain, and so spoilers might be involved here and there. But yeah, you're not going to watch this. You're not going to watch this film whatsoever. Either you've already watched it and you want to hear my thoughts on it, or you just want to hear me trash this film because you've heard that it's bad. There's no way that you're going into this film with any level of excitement anyway. So let's just dispel the formalities and jump right into my thoughts. So for this review, we're just going to be diving right into the issues that I had with this film, because there are many to get through. And first and foremost, it's the story itself from so many different facets. Firstly, let's talk about the source material. I don't know much about the book, Hillbilly Elegy itself, but it was written by the protagonist, JD, I believe his name is, in the film. He actually is a real person who wrote this story. This is his story. And it seems as though he is filled with so much contempt for his community. It is shocking. Like, if this script is anything like the book itself, it seems as though he despises his community. He resents the community and the opportunities that he missed out on because of it, and he seems to resent his family members as well. It's so disheartening. It's so atrocious to see just how little he thinks of the people that he comes from. And a lot of the time it makes it really difficult to sympathize with this character, because it seems as though he poo-poos everyone in his community without trying to fully understand them. And speaking of trying to understand them, how can you possibly try to understand this community when the film, and presumably the book, refuses to explore the underlying issues that plague the community and causes all of these issues that are generational, that seem to repeat themselves every generation? Like, they don't even attempt to explore the socio-political situation in that community in the middle of America. They don't even attempt to explain the opioid crisis or anything of the sort. It's literally just like, this family seems to be crazy. Like, this family seems to have a crazy gene running through it, and he has to escape as far away as he possibly can in order to avoid meeting the same fate as his predecessors. This is such a shame, because this film could have presented itself as an opportunity for Hollywood to spotlight a community that is often underrepresented in films. Now, I often talk about the diversification of representation of Black peoples or LGBTQ peoples. I often mention how important it is that we have a diversity in the ways that these stories are being told, the stories of the underrepresented peoples and the minorities in these cultures. That also goes for communities like this, who have a lower socioeconomic class, very poor people struggling in their societies. Perhaps the heyday of their society has gone by, and that causes a lot of cultural tension. This film refuses to explore those layers upon layers of complexity in those communities, to the point where the characters just seem so two-dimensional, and the character of JD himself, who we're supposed supposed to root for, who we're supposed to feel happy that he got away from that place, is just so unempathetic and he's so unlikable. But on top of that, paradoxically, this film tries to convey a message of family and the importance of family and having a bond with your community, whilst also showing how much of a dislike, a disdain towards his community that JD actually has. So there's definitely a conflict in terms of the message that they're trying to convey in the story. So that family angle makes absolutely no sense in the context of this story. And when you see the way that the family is treating one another and how mean they are to one another, and on top of that you have the fact that there's no real explanation for how they got to this place, why it is that they feel so stuck. When you take all of that into consideration, there's no way that you as a viewer can be convinced that this family is bonded by anything other than a sense of obligation. Now, considering that a lot of the issues that I just discussed were issues with the source material itself, because the book itself has that critique that it doesn't really explore socio-political circumstances in these communities, it doesn't really go into real depth other than the self-interest of the main character, the person who wrote the book. It seems to me that it's pretty clear that this book wasn't a great contender to be adapted into film in the first place. But since Hollywood was already there, since Ron Howard was already intent on making this film, the least he could have done was gotten a good script. The least he could have done was gotten a good script. My, oh my, this script is horrible. This script is really bad. Listen, I'm not a writer, okay? I'm not a writer, but let me tell you, when I was watching this film, I had to like do a double take because I couldn't believe the words coming out of some of these characters' mouths. No one spoke like they would naturally speak, especially the character of JD. JD didn't sound like a real person. He sounded like an amalgamation of speeches from other Oscar-winning films. Like, he didn't sound, he didn't speak like a real person, especially the grown-up version of JD. We'll go through the characters later on, but the script itself was just so bad. Also, I wasn't a fan of the structure of the film, which goes into the kind of screenplay of the film. The structure of the film was all over the place. I personally think that they should have toned down the non-linear storytelling because it got a little bit confusing jumping through time. It's bad enough that you have the adult version of JD and then you have the younger version, but then you also have the slightly older version, the slightly younger version being intertwined there. I think it would have been so much better if they had led up to his progress and his academic success and then shown him go off to the army and then earn his scholarship and then make it to Yale, only to cut back and find out, you know, about what happened to his mother. I think that would have been so much more of a progressive, interesting narrative as opposed to the cutting back and forth. And I understand because they wanted to set up the kind of backstory as we saw him grow up with his mother and the issues that he had with her. Completely understand it on that front, but they did that so many times that it felt like it was a 50-50 split. Usually when you have a backstory be told, it's like a third, maybe even less than that, like a quarter of the film itself. But this very much felt like half of the film was told in the past and half of the film was told in the future. Perhaps even more was told in the past, actually, in hindsight. And so to have that be a flashback constantly whilst you're trying to focus as well on the adult version of this character, it's just very distracting and it feels kind of all over the place. But that's still not even the only problem with the script. We already have bad dialogue, okay? We have a terrible structure, like the structural integrity of this one is all over the place. But then we have to talk about the main character, JD. Or is he? Or is he the main character of this story? Because it seems as though the film wants three main characters. We have the grandmother, we have JD himself, and we have his mother, Bev. They're all fighting, competing for attention here. Considering the caliber of the actresses we have portraying the grandmother and the mother, that being Glenn Close and Amy Adams respectively, there's no way that JD himself would stand out amongst those two powerhouses of performances. There's literally no way. Like, he looks so mediocre in comparison. It's like, it was such a bad idea to cast a relatively unknown for this role. If we were gonna have three main characters in this film, at least have three actors of the same caliber, because this poor guy was struggling to catch up, okay? Amy Adams was doing her thing. She was phenomenal. She's literally phenomenal. But even more so, Glenn Close was transformative. Truly, I actually think that Glenn Close was like, she kind of stole Amy Adams's shine a little bit, which is tough because, again, Amy Adams is vying for that Oscar. And I guess Glenn Close is as well after losing out to Olivia Colman. But I think Glenn Close was incredible as the grandmother. Truly transformative. I didn't see Glenn Close when she was acting. She just became that grandmother character. Whereas Amy Adams, like, every time I looked at her, I kind of saw her. It didn't have anything to do with the hair and makeup. Like, the hair and makeup was great. and it seems as though Amy Adams actually put on weight for the role, so it seemed authentic enough. But Glenn Close entirely disappeared in her role in a way that Amy Adams never did for me personally. But anyways, the fact that we have these two actresses competing for attention with this relatively unknown actor in the center of the story is unfortunate. And then we also have the fact that this film is determined to focus all of its attention on these three characters all at once. It was never going to work out. Those characters are shortchanged because of the lack of focus here. Like, we needed to focus on one element. I personally think that Amy Adams' story and the way that she got to how she is now with, you know, the drug addiction and everything, I think that was more of a compelling story than JD's story about how he ended up escaping his community because of that lack of compassion that he has for the people of that community and for his own family members, seemingly. I feel like just focusing in on the mother and focusing in on her plight and even highlighting how much potential that she had in order to truly drive home how much of a shame it is that she fell into this plight would have been so much more of a compelling story than focusing on JD, who seemed like such an ungrateful cow, an ungrateful cow for the majority of this film, especially as a kid. Ugh, he was so unlikable. If I was to give any praise of any element of this film, other than the incredible performances by Amy Adams and Glenn Close, would be the fact that Ron Howard tried to tackle this topic in the first place, because I do think that this is a community of people who are underrepresented in film and television. I think it is very important to showcase the lives of people living in the South and in the middle of the US, because this is a totally different lifestyle, it's a totally different culture, and seemingly a totally different country in many times. I mean, when it comes to the US, it is so huge that it seems as though, you know, places like Florida feel so different to Alaska, which feels so different to Hawaii. Like, it seems as though it's literally 50 different countries being smushed into one and precariously held together by a constitution. So I think it's fascinating to explore different elements of life in America. But I do think that the onus was on Ron Howard or any other filmmaker in the future who wants to tackle this topic to fully do their research and fully understand why it is that these communities have found themselves in the plight that they currently are in. What are the complex reasons and the underlying, you know, roots of these issues? Because without that, it seems as though we're just watching poverty porn. This is a different kind of poverty porn. I'm usually looking in dismay at black poverty porn, but this is white poverty porn, which is interesting. It's new, but it's still something that I disapprove of. I need an explanation of the underlying issues, because that's when things get a bit more complex. That's when things get a little bit more compelling. Otherwise, I'm just watching poor people struggle, and the one poor person who can make it, who can work hard enough to make it, makes it. But in the end, like, that's just not a realistic take on the issues that surround these communities. This idea that if you just work hard enough, if, you know, strap on those boots or whatever that phrase is, then you can make it to the top. Like, that's not it. That's literally not it. Like, the people that make it to the top, they have connections, they have ways in which they can get through and break through all of those glass ceilings that are presented to those of us who don't have those connections. So I wanted an exploration of that. We even get this scene where JD is at this important dinner where he's meeting a ton of lawyers, and he could potentially get interviews with these law firms that could be very beneficial to him because he can't afford to stay in school at the moment. And instead of focusing on the fact that lots of his classmates probably have connections, right? Like, they're probably related to people who are partners at law firms. No, instead we focus on the fact that, like, he doesn't know which fork to use with, you know, what dish, and he doesn't know where to hold his drink. That's such a superficial thing to focus on. If we really wanted to dive into the roots of the issue and the impact of, you know, socioeconomic disparities in the country and what that does to even the smartest minds, we would take a look at his classmates. We would have a comparator where we would see, you know, someone who has that connection where they're at Yale Law School, which is already incredible, but they also have an uncle who works at a law firm, and therefore they're able to get an internship just like that, perhaps even without an interview. They're automatically getting ahead. So even with all of his hard work, there are certain aspects of success that are unattainable if you're from a lower socioeconomic class. I mean, trust me, as someone who went to law school, trust me, I found it frustrating that the film never really got to the meat of that story. It just focused on knives and forks. Like, that's not the problem. that's not the issue here. But anyways, we're not going to stick with this one for too long. My final comment would be great praise for the score of this film, because of course it's Hans Zimmer. It's Hans Zimmer. That's how you know that they really wanted it to be an awards contender. They got Hans Zimmer up in here giving us a great score. But back to my statement from before, a lot of people were saying that this is like the worst film of the year. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That is just so hyperbolic. This is certainly not the worst film of the year. I mean, we have films like Coffee and Kareem that came out this year. We could do worse. But in terms of awards hopefuls, oh, this is then that's just been dashed right out of the window. That makes absolutely no sense now. So with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Hillbilly Elegy a 5.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Hillbilly Elegy, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!